Iridian teeth and bones snapped like brittle twigs between human jaws, as starving Earth soldiers devoured their former alien allies, gaining crucial calories to continue their valiant defense against the ruthless Corelli's onslaught. Richard Grant, a battle-hardened human soldier, crouched in a muddy trench on the war-torn planet Iridia Prime. Plasma bolts sizzled overhead as he reloaded his rail rifle, the barrel still smoking from his last shot. Beside him, his Iridian comrade Neron cowered, his weapon shaking in his trembling hands. Richard glanced over, meeting Neron's terrified eyes. He grunted, "Get it together, Private. We're the only thing standing between the Corellics and the civilian transports. If we don't hold this line, thousands more will die." Richard's words were punctuated by an ear-splitting shriek as a Corellic's artillery shell detonated nearby, showering them with dirt. Neron whimpered, "It's hopeless. The Corellics are too strong, too brutal. We can't win." Richard seized Neron by the front of his uniform, pulling him close. "Listen to me. Yes, the Corellics are brutal. Yes, they're strong. But do you know what they're not? They're not human." Richard released Neron and turned back to the battlefield, raising his rifle to his shoulder. "And if there's one thing in this galaxy that can match Corellic's brutality and beat Corellic's strength, it's human resolve." Richard rose to a crouch, glaring down his rifle sights. He snarled, "Now shut up and fight. Because if we fail here, the Corellian will slaughter every last Iridian. And when the Iridians are gone, only us humans will be left. The Corellians will hunt down and exterminate every human colony, every last man, woman, and child." Richard's finger tightened on the trigger as he caught sight of Corellic's movement. He growled, "So we fight like hell. We hold the line. We make the Corellics pay for every inch, every casualty. Because if we don't stop them here, humanity's next." The scene shifts to Richard's first encounter with the Iridians 2 years prior. As a grunt, fresh out of boot camp, Richard is part of a human expeditionary force responding to the Iridians' desperate plea for aid against the Corelli. Richard's dropship touches down in the Iridian capital city. The hatch hisses open, and Richard steps out into a war zone. Smoke chokes the air, the acrid stench of burning buildings and vehicles assaulting his nostrils. The sound of distant explosions and plasma fire echoes through the streets. But what shocks Richard most is the sea of Iridian refugees that pack the capital's once grand avenues. Thousands of them huddled together, many nursing wounds, all wearing expressions of pure terror. Iridian soldiers, their armor battered and bloodied, struggle to maintain some semblance of order amidst the chaos. Richard's commanding officer, Colonel Hawkins, gathers the human troops in a hastily erected command post. His face is grim as he delivers their orders. "Listen up," Hawkins barks. "The Corellics hit this planet hard and fast. Iridian casualties are high and they're barely hanging on. Our job is to plug the gaps in their defenses and hold the line until reinforcements arrive. Stay sharp and watch each other's backs. Move out." As the humans disperse to their assigned positions, Richard spots a Iridian soldier, Neron, trying to calm a group of frightened children. The kids cling to Neron, their large eyes wide with fear. Richard approaches, offering a friendly smile despite the grim circumstances. "Hey, looks like we're going to be fighting side by side. I'm Richard Grant." Neron looks up, surprised and a little wary. "I am Neron. You are human? I have never seen your kind before." Richard chuckles, patting his rifle. "Yeah, we're a bit of a rarity out here. But don't worry, we know how to fight. We'll have your backs." Neron's expression is a mix of hope and doubt. "I pray you are right, Richard Grant. The Corellics they are monsters. They will not stop until every last Iridian is dead or enslaved." Richard's jaw tightens. His grip on his weapon tightens. "Yeah, I've heard the stories, but trust me, we're not about to let that happen. We'll stop them, whatever it takes." Neron nods, some of the fear in his eyes replaced by determination. He stands ushering the children towards a nearby shelter. Richard watches them go, a fierce resolve burning in his chest. He doesn't know it yet, but this is the beginning of a war that will push humanity and Richard himself to their very limits. A war that will redefine the balance of power in the galaxy and test the mettle of every species, every soldier, every individual. A war where the stakes couldn't be higher, for if the Krillix aren't stopped here, it won't just be the Iridians facing extinction. It will be all of them, humanity included. The scene flashes back to the present, with Richard and Niran hunkered down in the mud-caked trenches, plasma bolts zipping over their heads. Niran reloads his weapon with shaking hands, fumbling the power cell. Richard's eyes never leave his rifle sights, his trigger finger tense. Suddenly a shadow looms over the battlefield. A colossal Krillix war machine crests the hill, its armored shell glinting in the harsh sunlight. The monstrosity rears up, revealing an arsenal of devastating weapons that could melt through their defenses. Richard swears, his face paling. He turns to Niran. "Niran, tell me you've got anti-armor stashed somewhere." Niran shakes his head, his voice quavering. "We have nothing that can get through that thing's hide. It's going to tear right through us." Richard's mind races, searching for an option. His gaze falls on a Krillix grenade lying in the muck, covered in the green sludge that passes for Krillix blood. A crazy idea forms. "Niran, cover me. I'm going to do something stupid." Niran starts to object, but Richard's already moving. He snatches the grenade and charges straight at the war machine, weaving and dodging to avoid its withering fire. The machine's weapons swivel to track him, the air sizzling with plasma. At the last second, Richard baseball slides under the machine's belly. He shoves the grenade into a chink in its underside armor and scrambles clear. The grenade detonates, the blast tearing through the machine's guts. It collapses, a smoking heap of scrap. Richard jogs back to the trenches, his armor blackened but whole. Niran gapes at him, stunned. "How did you—" Richard grins despite his brush with death. "Improvising, buddy. When you're out of options, you gotta make new ones. It's the human way." The dust settled on the blood-soaked battlefield. Human and Iridian soldiers alike lay strewn across the muddy ground. The Krillix war machine lay in smoldering ruins, a testament to human tenacity and ingenuity, but the respite was short-lived. Richard and Niran trudged through the trenches towards the Iridian command post, the urgency in their summons evident. As they pushed through the tent flaps, the somber faces of Colonel Hawkins and General Zarak greeted them. The tension in the air was palpable. Hawkins wasted no words. "We've got trouble, boys, big trouble. Our scouts found a massive Krillix hive 50 clicks north of here. It's their main staging ground for the whole damn invasion." Zarak stepped forward, his face etched with worry. "If we don't take out that hive, the Krillix will roll over us in days. They're breeding soldiers faster than we can kill them." Hawkins nodded grimly, activating a holographic map of the hive. "We need a surgical strike on the hive's key structures, but here's the kicker." He zoomed in on a pulsing red chamber at the hive's heart. "This is the Queen's chamber. As long as she's kicking, the Krillix will keep coming. No matter how many we kill, we have to take her out." Richard studied the map, his brow furrowed. "Let me guess, a frontal assault is suicide." "Bingo, Grant," Hawkins confirmed. "Their defenses are too thick. We'd be bug chow before we got within spitting distance of the Queen." Niran cleared his throat, drawing their attention. What if we don't go in the front door?" He pointed to a narrow tunnel snaking towards the Queen's chamber. "When the Kurlanki first came, they took many of my people into the hives through tunnels like this to be processed. If a small team could get in through here—" Hawkins' eyes lit up. They could hit the Queen before the Krillix knew what bit him. He clapped Niran on the shoulder. "Sharp thinking, Private. Time to show these overgrown roaches what human ingenuity can do." Richard felt a surge of adrenaline, a grim smile tugging at his lips. This was it, the turning point. If they could pull this off, they might just have a shot at winning this war. But the risks were enormous, the margin for error non-existent. He met Niran's gaze, seeing the same mix of determination and fear reflected back. They both knew what was at stake. For their comrades, for the Iridians, for humanity itself. Failure was not an option. As the dust settled from the last skirmish, Richard, Niran, and a small team of battle-hardened soldiers gathered their gear, checking and double-checking every piece of equipment. This was no ordinary mission. They had been hand-picked, the best of the best, for a desperate gambit, to infiltrate the heart of the Krulix hive and strike at the Queen herself. Richard glanced over at Niran as he loaded his plasma rifle, noticing the slight tremble in the Iridian's hands. He stepped over, placing a reassuring hand on Niran's shoulder. "Hey, it's going to be all right. We've got this." Niran looked up, meeting Richard's gaze. Fear and determination warred in his eyes. "I know, it's just... I've never been inside a hive before. The stories I've heard..." Richard nodded, understanding all too well. The tales of what happened inside Krulix hives were the stuff of nightmares. "I get it. But remember, you're not alone. We're in this together." Under the cover of darkness, the team set out, navigating by the dim glow of their helmet lights. The entrance to the tunnel yawned before them, a dark maw leading into the bowels of the hive. As they descended, the air grew thick and humid, pressing in on them like a physical weight. The walls pulsed with a sickly organic texture, as if the hive itself was a living, breathing entity. Strange clicking and chittering noises echoed through the tunnels, the sounds of Krulix communication, setting everyone's nerves on edge. Each shadow seemed to hide a waiting monstrosity, each bend in the tunnel a potential ambush. Suddenly a Krulix warrior emerged from the darkness, its mandibles dripping with corrosive acid. Richard reacted on pure instinct, his plasma rifle already up and firing. The creature dropped, its carapace smouldering from the high-energy blast. But the sound of the gunshot echoed through the tunnels like a clap of thunder, and soon the chittering intensified. Krulix warriors swarmed from every direction, their claws and fangs glinting in the dim light. The team fought like possessed beings, plasma fire illuminating the tunnels in strobing flashes. In the chaos, Richard saw Niran go down, a Krulix looming over him, ready to strike. Without hesitation, Richard charged, slamming into the creature with bone-jarring force. They tumbled to the ground, a tangle of limbs and snapping jaws. Richard pressed his rifle against the Krulix's head and pulled the trigger, splattering the wall with ichor. He scrambled to his feet, pulling Niran up with him. "I told you, we're in this together. No one gets left behind." Deeper and deeper they pushed, the resistance growing fiercer with every step. But Richard and Niran fought side by side, their bond forged in the crucible of combat. They were no longer human and Iridian, but brothers in arms, united against a common foe. Finally they breached the Queen's chamber, a vast cavernous space that dwarfed anything they had seen before, and there, at the center, was the Queen herself, a towering monstrosity, her hideous form pulsing with vile energies. She turned to face them, her eyes burning with malevolent intelligence. The final battle was about to begin. Narrator: the Krulix Queen towered before the strike team, a monstrous nightmare of chitinous armor and razor-sharp appendages. As the humans entered her chamber, her multifaceted eyes gleamed with cruel intelligence, and she let out a menacing hiss that echoed off the pulsating walls. Colonel Hawkins stepped forward, his plasma rifle leveled at the Queen's head. "Take her down now," he barked. The strike team opened fire, a hail of bullets and plasma bolts streaking towards the Queen, but they ricocheted harmlessly off her armored hide. The Queen reared up to her full, terrifying height and unleashed a deafening shriek that shook the chamber to its very foundations. The sound was like a physical force, driving the strike team back. And then the Krulix warriors came, swarming into the chamber from every tunnel and crevice. They were a tide of claws and fangs and snapping mandibles, driven by a singular instinct: defend the Queen at all costs. The strike team found themselves quickly overwhelmed, forced back step by step as the Krulix pressed their advantage. Niran fired burst after burst into the oncoming horde, but it was like trying to hold back the tide with a bucket. He turned to Richard, desperation etched on his face. "The Queen's armor is too strong. We can't harm her." Richard's eyes darted around the chamber, searching for something, anything that could turn the tide. Then he saw it, a pulsing, luminescent sac attached to the Queen's underbelly, partially shielded by her armored plates. There, he shouted, pointing. That must be where she's breeding her warriors if we take that out. Hawkins nodded grimly. It's our only shot. Grant, Niran, you're up. We'll hold off the warriors. Richard and Niran exchanged a look, a wordless communication born of countless battles fought side by side. Then, as one, they charged forward, straight into the heart of the Krulik swarm. It was like running through a gauntlet of blades. Kurlik's warriors slashed and lunged at them from every side, their claws scraping against armor, their jaws snapping mere inches from exposed flesh. But Richard and Niran pressed on, dodging and weaving, their rifles spitting plasma fire at point-blank range. They reached the base of the Queen's towering form. Niran dropped to one knee, providing covering fire, as Richard began to scale the Queen's armored carapace. It was like climbing a mountain of knives, every handhold threatening to slice him to the bone. But he climbed higher and higher, the Queen's enraged shrieks filling his ears. He reached the pulsing sac, a repulsive mass of translucent membrane and pulsating veins. His rifle was useless at such close range. Without hesitation, he drew his combat knife and plunged it into the sac with all his strength. The Queen's shriek became a deafening wail of agony as viscous green fluid spurted from the wound, drenching Richard. Gritting his teeth, he hacked and slashed, tearing the sac open wider and wider. More fluid gushed out, along with squirming, half-formed Krilix larvae. The Queen thrashed and bucked, trying to dislodge him, but Richard held on, knife plunging again and again into the breeding sac. The Queen's wails reached a crescendo, and then abruptly cut off as the sac collapsed in on itself, a deflated ruin. All around the chamber, the Krilix warriors faltered, their movements becoming erratic and uncoordinated. It was as if they had been cut off from a controlling intelligence, left rudderless and confused. The strike team seized the opportunity. Concentrating their fire on the Queen, they let loose with everything they had. Under the relentless onslaught, the Queen's armor began to crack and splinter. Chunks of chitin flew off, exposing vulnerable flesh beneath. And then, with a final earth-shaking crash, the Queen fell. Her massive form hit the ground, limbs twitching spasmodically, ichor pooling around her ruined body. For a moment, there was silence. Narrator. Then, in the eerie stillness after the Queen's death, came a discovery that shook the strike team to their core. As they ventured deeper into the bowels of the hive, they stumbled upon a nightmarish sight, the remains of the captured Iridians, their bodies twisted and warped, fused with the very structure of the hive itself. It was a grotesque mockery of life, a perversion of all that was natural. Limbs and torsos protruded from the pulsating walls, wired into a hellish network of biological circuitry. Faces, frozen in eternal agony, stared out from the fleshy morass. Niran, confronted with the desecrated remains of his own people, fell to his knees, a wail of anguish tearing from his throat. His rifle clattered to the ground as he buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with grief and horror. Richard, though equally sickened by the sight, knew they couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now. Not when they were so close. He knelt beside Niran, placing a hand on the Iridian's trembling shoulder. Niran raised his head, his eyes haunted, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. Niran stared at Richard for a long moment, a myriad of emotions warring on his face. Then, slowly, he nodded. He picked up his rifle and stood, a new resolve burning in his eyes. Together, the team made their way out of the collapsing hive, the structure shuddering and crumbling around them as the Queen's death throes reverberated through every tunnel and chamber. But even as they ran, dodging falling debris and spurts of acidic ichor, they couldn't escape the horrors they had witnessed. The images of those tortured, mutilated Iridians were seared into their minds, a trauma that would haunt them for the rest of their days. As they burst from the hive's entrance, they were greeted by a scene of utter pandemonium. Without the controlling influence of the Queen, the Krolings had turned on each other, the hive dissolving into a frenzy of internecine violence. Warrior tore into warrior, mandibles ripping into carapaces, acidic blood spraying in sizzling arcs. It was a primal, savage display, a glimpse into the true nature of the Krolix without the hive mind to guide them. The team fought their way through the chaos, plasma rifles blazing, cutting down the frenzied Krolix with ruthless efficiency. They were battered and bloodied, their armor pitted and scarred, but they were alive. They had done the impossible. News of their victory spread like a shockwave through the Iridian ranks. As Richard and his team stumbled into the command post, they were met with a scene of pure, unadulterated joy. Iridian soldiers cheered and wept, embracing each other, their voices rising in a chorus of triumph and relief. For the first time in months, in years, they allowed themselves to hope. General Zarek pushed through the crowd, his eyes shining with emotion. He clasped Richard's hand, then Niran's, his grip firm and unwavering. "You've done it," he said, his voice thick. "You've given us a chance, a real chance, but—" His expression sobered, the weight of responsibility settling back onto his shoulders. "The war is not over. The Krolix are still out there, and they will be hungry for revenge." Richard and Niran exchanged a glance, a wealth of understanding passing between them. They had been through hell together, had seen the very worst the galaxy had to offer, but they had also seen the best in each other and in their fellow soldiers. They had forged a bond that could never be broken. As the scene fades, Richard's voice echoes, a promise and a warning. That was the turning point, the moment we showed the galaxy that the Krolix could bleed, that they could be beaten. The moment humanity stepped up to stand against the darkness, no matter the cost. But our fight was far from over. Narrator. The Krolix fortress loomed over the blasted landscape, like a malevolent titan, its spires twisting into the polluted sky. Inside the central chamber, the Krolix king stood before a pulsing orb, his form dwarfing the warriors that surrounded him. The king's voice rumbled through the chamber, a sound like boulders grinding together. "The humans believe they have achieved victory. They think the death of our queen has broken us." His claws clenched, scraping against his armored carapace. "But they are mistaken. They have merely fanned the flames of our rage." He turned to face the orb, its sickly light casting his features in sharp relief. "The humans will learn the true power of the Krolix. They will see that our strength is not in one queen, but in our unity, our relentless drive to conquer." With a snarl, the king plunged his claws into the orb, its light intensified, pulsing in time with the king's heartbeat. A wave of energy burst from the orb, racing across the planet's surface. In the ruins of shattered cities and scorched forests, dormant Krolix hives began to stir. The ground trembled as new queens emerged, their shrieks piercing the air. Warriors swarmed from the depths, their numbers beyond counting. At the Iridian command post, alarms screamed to life as reports flooded in. Krolix attacks, more ferocious than ever before, struck Iridian and human positions across the planet. Colonel Hawkins slammed his fist on the holographic display table, his face contorted with frustration. "Damn it! We should have known taking out the Queen was too easy. The Krolix are like a hydra. Cut off one head, and two more take its place." Richard and Niran stepped forward, their armor still bearing the scars of the last battle. Niran's voice was heavy with exhaustion and sorrow, but also with steely determination. "The Krolix have taken everything from my people, our cities, our loved ones, our hope. We can't let them take our future too." Richard nodded, placing a hand on Niran's shoulder. "Niran's right. We've bled too much, lost too much to give up now. The Krolix want a war of annihilation. We'll give them one they'll never forget." As the scene fades, my voice continues the narration. "We thought we had struck a decisive blow against the Krolix. We were wrong. Our fight was far from over." But in that moment, facing an enemy that seemed unstoppable, humanity and the Iridians found strength in each other. We realized that only together could we hope to stand against the storm. And so we prepared for what we knew would be the final battle. A battle not just for the fate of Iridia Prime, but for the fate of every species the Krolix threatened. The Iridians had already lost so much, but in their darkest hour they found an ally, a friend in humanity. Together, We would face the Krul's king and his hordes. Together we would end his reign of terror or die trying. There was no other choice. For all of us it was victory or extinction. And as I looked around at the faces of my comrades, human and Iridian alike, I saw not fear, but resolve. A determination to fight, to the last breath if necessary. Because some things are worth fighting for, even dying for. Freedom, justice, the right to exist. The Krullis had taken too much from too many. It was time we took something back. Narrator. Richard's words rang through the chamber as he stood over the fallen Krul's king, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. The battle had been long and brutal, the price paid in blood and sacrifice, but in the end, against all odds, they had prevailed. The strike team, exhausted but elated, gathered around their leader. Niran clapped a hand on Richard's shoulder, his eyes shining with a mix of pride and disbelief. We did it. I can't believe we actually did it. Richard nodded, his gaze never leaving the king's lifeless form. Believe it. This is what humans do. When our backs are against the wall, when all hope seems lost, we find a way. We always find a way. But even as they savored their victory, the reality of their situation began to sink in. The fortress shuddered around them, the sounds of battle still raging outside. They had won the day, but the war was far from over. Richard turned to his team, his expression grim. We need to move. The Krul's will be in disarray without their king, but they won't stay that way for long. We have to press our advantage, hit them hard and fast before they can regroup. As they made their way out of the chamber, picking their way through the carnage they had wrought, Richard's mind was already racing ahead, planning their next move. The Krul's king may have been dead, but his legacy of terror lived on. There were still hives to clear, warriors to defeat, a planet to liberate. But for the first time in a long time, Richard allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. They had done the impossible today. They had shown the galaxy that the Krul's could be beaten, that their reign of terror could be ended. And if they could do that, then maybe, just maybe, they could win this war once and for all. It wouldn't be easy. It would take every ounce of courage, every shred of determination they had. But they would do it. They had to. For the Iridians, for humanity, for every species that had ever suffered under the heel of the Krul's, failure was not an option. Victory was the only acceptable outcome. And so, as Richard led his team out into the fray once more, he carried with him not just the weight of their mission, but the hopes and dreams of an entire galaxy. It was a burden he was more than willing to bear. The scene shifts, the fortress fading into the background as Richard's narration takes over once more. That was the beginning of the end for the Krul's. With their king dead and their forces in disarray, we pressed our attack, liberating world after world from their grip. But the scars of the war ran deep for all of us. We had seen things, done things that would haunt us for the rest of our days. And yet, through it all, we had found something too. A bond forged in the fires of combat that could never be broken. Humans and Iridians, once strangers, now brothers and sisters in arms. We had fought together, bled together, triumphed together, and though the road ahead was long and uncertain, one thing was clear. Richard's voice, thick with emotion, narrates over the scene of devastation. With the king dead, the Krul's fell into disarray. We had won, but the cost was high. Smoke billows from the ruins of the once grand Krul's fortress. The ground is a carpet of broken bodies, both Krul's and Iridian, their blood mingling in the dirt. Medics, their uniforms stained and hands shaking from exhaustion, move among the fallen, triaging the wounded, but for many help has come too late. Richard picks his way through the carnage, his rifle hanging limply at his side. The adrenaline of battle has faded, leaving only a bone-deep weariness and a hollow sense of victory. As he surveys the destruction, his eyes land on a familiar figure. Niran kneels beside a fallen Iridian soldier, his head bowed, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Richard approaches, placing a hand on Niran's shoulder. Niran looks up, his face streaked with tears and grime. "He was my brother," Niran chokes out. He just wanted to see our home free from the Kriliks." Richard kneels beside him, his own eyes stinging with unshed tears. "I'm sorry, Niran, he died a hero, they all did." Niran nods, his grief mixing with a grim resolution. He stands, his gaze sweeping over the battlefield. "We won because of you, Richard, because of the humans. But this is not the end. The Kriliks are broken, but not destroyed. And there are other threats out there, other empires that would see us fall." Richard rises, his jaw set. "You're right, this isn't the end. Humanity will stand with you, with all those who fight for freedom, no matter the threat, no matter the cost." The scene shifts, years passing in a blink. A Iridian city, once reduced to rubble, now thrives again. Towering spires glint in the sunlight, bustling streets echo with the sounds of life. But the scars of the war remain, etched into the city's very foundations. In a sprawling plaza, a memorial stands, a silent tribute to the fallen. Names cover its surface, Iridian and human alike. Before it stands Niran, older now, his face lined with the passage of years and the weight of leadership. Beside him is Richard, his hair grey, his stance still proud. They stand in silence, each lost in their own memories. Finally Niran speaks, his voice heavy with emotion. "We rebuilt, but we never forgot. The sacrifices, the pain, they shaped us, made us stronger." Richard nods, his own voice rough with age and memory. "We learned a hard lesson. The galaxy is a harsh, unforgiving place, but as long as we stand together, as long as we fight for what's right, there's always hope." As the two old friends stand in silent remembrance, Richard's voice echoes over the scene of final narration. That was our story, the story of how humanity stood against the darkness. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was an ending we could live with. For in the face of evil, in the face of annihilation, we did not yield. We fought, we bled, we lost, but in the end, we prevailed. And as long as humanity endures, as long as we hold to our principles, we always will. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.